This is our first session of the Accessible Adoptions More Lives Saved series. This is a three-part series where we're going to be exploring how to make your shelter the first choice for pet adoption by improving accessibility, building trust, and also those lasting relationships with adopters. Today, we're going to be featuring a presentation that speaks to how you can remove barriers from adoption that build lasting connections with your community. Before handing it over, I'm just going to go over a couple housekeeping notes. For today, everyone will remain muted, but you are more than welcome and in fact encouraged to enter questions in the Q&A box. There's a box at the bottom of your screen that you can enter those questions into. We will hold on to those for our panel session that will be on the 17th of this month. This session will be recorded and uploaded to our network partner YouTube channel so that you are able to watch it later on or share it with anyone in your organization. And now I'll go ahead and pass it over to our speaker for today, Michael Keeley, and he will take it over. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm going to do that moment where it takes a second for me to put this up, but it looks just going to check with you to make sure you can see it. Awesome.
It looks great.
So we're talking about open adoption theory. This is something that I am incredibly passionate about. And the only correction is my last name is Kylie. So you were close, but it's spelled weird. So that is the way it goes. Can you see the second screen, Erica? All right, great. We're rolling. So here's what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk a little bit about me, my favorite subject, and MSPCA Angel, current state of animal welfare, causes, and how do we solve this issue. We're going to talk some data. So those of you, I was supposed to say woohoo, but woo will also work. And ultimately, we're just going to talk about what is the actual data, and are we projecting the things that are actually happening, or are we kind of drawing on experiences only? And what is open adoption theory and what it is not is going to be a main function of this. We're also going to make, I've been through this discussion a million times. So instead of going through this process where I tell you why I think removing barriers is really important, and then you tell me all the reasons that it can't, I'm going to tell you both. I'm going to tell you the reason that you should remove them and the reasons that people don't remove them. But I'm going to state my opinion pretty strongly throughout this about why I think it's really important that we do remove barriers to adoption. And what does that actually mean? Because I think there's a lot of mystery around it. We're going to talk about fee-waived adoption specifically, because it's like a whole nother level when we start talking about removing fees for some folks. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we applied this strategy amidst our current challenges and the results that we had. And most importantly, we're going to talk about how to get started at your own organization, because that is often the first step, is the hardest step, and I want to get you started. I'm going to even give you a challenge at the end. And then if there's time, every presentation is an adventure. So sometimes they go right to the last minute. Sometimes they end a little bit early. So if there's Q&A time, we'll do it today. If not, Q&A at the panel will be the opportunity that will, from my understanding, you can put your Q&A in, and it will be brought up at the panel if we don't cover it today. All right, so a little bit about me. I'm the Vice President of the Animal Protection Division. I'm going to talk about what that means at the MSPCA, just so you have an understanding of our organization. My other unofficial volunteer titles, I'm the board chair for Shelter Animals Count. So that's why we're going to talk about data today, because I care about data a lot. And I'm the founding member and advisor to an organization called Spark, which is an organization that is really about changing the messaging in animal welfare to be more of like a systems framing and empathetic approach than what our traditional messaging has been. And I started, as you can see here, these two photos. I started at the MSPCA back in the late 1900s, otherwise known as 1994, as a volunteer. And ultimately, this is what happens to you if you stay in animal welfare for a long time. You become fat and bald like I did. So, so here we are. That's me. Cats are, I should also tell you, we're going to probably talk a lot about dogs, a little spoiler alert, but I am a card-carrying cat guy, and that's what you're going to see those cats in pictures as well. All right, so who is the MSPCA Angel? Why are we relevant to this conversation? What do we do? We are a pretty big organization located in Massachusetts. I always have to explain the M when I'm doing national presentations to mean Massachusetts. So we're a pretty historic organization, founded in 1868. We have two major divisions. We have the hospital division, which is focused on providing high quality specialty and emergency care for animals that are owned by people. and does have access to affordable care options. And comes in three flavors. Our main hospital in Boston, Angel Animal Medical Center, which many people are aware of. We have a satellite location in Waltham, and we also have a partnership with a high school technical school in Danvers, Massachusetts. Coincidentally, not that this matters, but my wife works there. So we're card carrying MSPCA people, and she's a dog person. I'm a cat person. I don't know how that worked out. But for the animal protection division, which is the part that I run, which is the other part of the organization, and what we really founded our organization on, there are, five main components to it. There's a lot of pieces to it, but we cover a really wide spectrum of animal welfare in one organization. So we do have an advocacy department that works on state and local legislation to protect animals. So, for example, we've passed bans on breed-specific legislation through our advocacy efforts, which is really important to us. We have a humane law enforcement department. It is a small but mighty team of currently 6 officers that are responsible for investigation of animal cruelty and neglect throughout the entire 351 or 361 cities and towns in Massachusetts. Someone fact check me on which number that is. And then we have 4 adoption centers. They are all, in different locations on the eastern side of Massachusetts. We have one right in the city of Boston, which is more of a city shelter. We have one on Cape Cod, one in Salem, Massachusetts, and one in Methuen, Massachusetts. The one in Methuen contains an equine and farm animal center, so we do a full spectrum of animals. And Salem, which was recently merged into the MSPCA in 2021, is the largest relocation center in New England. So we do have a lot of big things that are happening in our adoption centers. And roughly, we take in about 11,000 animals a year between our 4 adoption centers. We also have community outreach. We believe strongly that to be able to impact change, we have to get outside of our shelter walls and into the community. And we are focused currently on 9 main communities that are historically excluded communities from access to resources. And we provide those resources to the best of our ability. And then last, we have 3 community clinics that do a combination of providing medical care for the shelter animals that we're caring for and law enforcement animals. We also do a high volume public spay neuter at a low cost. And a lot of that is supporting our community outreach efforts. And then lastly, you added a piece during a really convenient time of 2020, right at the start of the pandemic, where we now also provide access to affordable care for urgent outpatient surgical cases. So those things that threaten people's ability to stay with their pets or their pets' ability to stay with their people, pyometra surgeries like amputations, foreign bodies, we're doing that at a lower cost in the effort of trying to keep people and pets together. So that's who we are. Collectively, roughly our impact directly and indirectly through all of our programs is just under 110,000 animals a year. The more direct part is, like I mentioned, through our adoption centers, it's roughly around 11,000 animals coming directly into care, and the rest is through our support programs and how we impact animals outside of our shelter walls. All right, buckle up for some data. I want to make sure everybody is working off of the same premise and same understanding, and we're going to start here, which is, I've heard, and you have probably heard, especially as we went through COVID, people have said things like, this is the most intake of animals that we've ever had in our, in our history. And I think although it is really a current challenge, I think we really want to think about the context and explain a little bit of good news is that although there are lots of animals still coming into shelters, it has gone down over time. Again, I started in the late 1900s, and I feel very much like we are accomplishing a lot. And we're doing a lot to reduce the number of homeless animals and reduce the amount of euthanasia in shelters. We should not forget to celebrate that. But let's look at the actual numbers. We can see a little bit of good news here. This is 2024 numbers from Shelter Animals Count, and we can see that we're down 1.4% of intake from last year. Anything that means it's going down in intake is a good thing for everybody. And then we have to always look at pre-COVID times now, of which, all time seem to stop. And in 2019, I think it's important for us to know that we're seeing 11% lower numbers of animals coming into shelters prior to COVID. Now, many people haven't not worked in the field prior to COVID. A lot of people left the field during COVID. And so this is not to invalidate your feelings. You are feeling the pressure right now. But if we look at it historically, going into COVID, we were in a pretty good place. And we're actually seeing that the intake numbers are not reflecting higher than 2019. Very much so higher than 2021 and 2020, as we saw historically low intake. But it's, perspective wise, I think it's important to know this is not unprecedented. You hear that word used a lot, but that's not the point that we're in right now. And that is designed, again, not to invalidate your feelings, but to give you a little bit of hope that we can solve this problem. And that's what we're going to talk about a lot today. And so, what is that breakdown? It's about 2.9 million dogs entering shelters or rescues in 2024. That is 2% down from 2023 and 14% down from 2019. You can see some other interesting data in here that I'm not going to linger on, which is just about dog sizes and dog ages. What we can draw from that is the majority of dogs coming into our shelters are adults, and they are medium to large dogs. So that is a challenge point we're going to have to work through. And didn't realize there was animation in here. So as I catch up to that, there's 2.9 million cats entering shelters and rescues. That again is down 1% from 2023 and 8% down from 2019. And again, this entering shelters by age, you can see that we have a little bit more mix, super young kittens, adults, and then juveniles. It's a little bit more balanced than I think we see with the dogs. So for dogs and cats, there's these are the non-live outcomes in 2024. So 373,000 dogs and 374,000 cats. Again, this is down less than 1%, so not a significant amount, but less than 1% from 2023, and it's up 9% from 2019. So that's an area of concern. And for cats, 3% down and 37% down from 2019, which is a pretty significant change. And you can see that non-live outcomes primarily are referring to euthanasia. You see a little bit higher of died in care, lost in care for cats, and I think that's really representative of a lot of the neonate cats that we're seeing into our shelters. So in 2024, we saw over 4 million cats and dogs being adopted. That is up less than 1% from 2023 and down 5% compared to 2019. So, I'm giving you some hints here about where our challenges are, but I think this is an area that we can approach. This is an area that we can focus on when it comes to what does success look like, when it comes to how do we change this number and get greater variance in a positive direction. So when we break this down into cats and dogs, 2 million dogs were adopted in 2024. Now, the concerning part for me is it's down 1% from 2023 and down 13% from 2019. That is an area of concern. And again, we're going to start to focus on some of the issues related to small versus large and medium dogs. So we're seeing that our target point is focusing on large breed dogs. Oops, and I forgot the animation in here. So this is the length of stay for dogs with adoption outcomes by size. And you can see that the length of stay and those issues are being represented in there. All right, so cats, we're going to talk a little bit about cats as well. And you're going to see that my animation screwed up. So we have 2.2 million cats that were adopted in 2024, and that's up from 2023 and up from 2019. So, I mentioned I started in the late 1900s. I think the conclusion that we're going to focus on here, and I'll reinforce a little bit later on, is like cats are kind of doing us a favor right now. That has not traditionally been the case in animal welfare. Typically, cats was our biggest problem to solve. Luckily, when we're dealing with a lot of dog-related issues, cats are giving us a little bit of a breather. We're not battling both fronts quite as significantly as we have in the past. So that's a good thing. Doesn't mean we shouldn't focus on cats. Cats are super important. Again, I'm a card-carrying cat guy, so you're never going to hear me say anything other than cats are important. But we're going to focus our energies on dogs. And to that result, we're going to only really focus on the transfer of dogs and looking at that. So this is transfers in by organization type and dogs. And the things that I think are really clear here is that, and not really a big surprise, shelters that are government-funded agencies and shelters with a government contract, not highly represented as much in the transfer in categories. That's really going to be focused heavily on rescues without a government contract and shelters without a government contract. So rescues and private shelters. And we're seeing some concerns. We're seeing numbers go down with transfers, not up. So, we're going to talk a little bit about that part of it as well. But when we see adoptions going down and transfers going down, you can better believe that the government agencies that are taking on the bulk of, like the municipal agencies taking on the bulk of the animals, are under the most amount of pressure. And that is a challenge point that we need to really focus on as an animal welfare field, and how we might be able to work together to solve that problem. So my key data takeaways, like I said, our pain points right now are focused on dogs. And again, I would say, to be even more specific, dogs that are in municipal shelters, are the areas of focus point. Um, Dog intake is going down, but dog adoptions are also going down. And I think it's noting here that private shelters and rescues are the primary transfer partners, like I said, and have shown large decreases in transfers since 2019. We are seeing some compounding issues, and I think that is kind of locking up the system in a way that we need to really focus on how to solve it. And so, I'm going to pose to you what is the driving this current crisis. Again, I'm going to reinforce that it's not intake driven. I'm going to reinforce that because intake driven, we have a little bit less control over. It is, and it is what the narrative that is being said throughout animal welfare is, that this is an intake issue, an intake crisis. And I think it's just important for us to look at that data and say, it's not just about intake, it's about other things. So, the compounding factors that are happening in our community that are contributing to this are labor-related issues, staffing issues, being able to recruit, train, and retain good staff, and leadership is a challenge. The economy is a challenge. When the economy is a challenge, then we are challenged in the animal welfare field. There's a clear direct connection to that. The veterinary shortage, that is for sure creating issues for us. It's creating issues for just access to veterinary care for many shelters, but also it's competing with our length of stay. If we can't get spay neuter services or basic medical care handled from the service providers that we have as easily as we used to, then our length of stay is going to go up. And lack of access to affordable vet care, like spay neuter, that is a compounding issue. It is impacting our community dynamics and also impacting our ability to get animals in shelter cared for and spayed and neutered for adoption. So it is both. Decrease in adoptions and overall outcomes. I think it's important to note that adoption is our most positive outcome, but isn't the only outcome. And we think we are seeing ultimately what we're seeing is that length of stay going up. And when we look more granularly at that, there is some worries about making decisions for euthanasia. And so sometimes even shelters that are really overcrowded are holding on to animals that are decidedly not adoptable. And I know, obviously, we're talking on a webinar from Best Friends, and no kill becomes part of that conversation. I think it's important to note that Best Friends agrees that holding on to animals that are unsafe for the community and are not able to be placed is not the goal of no kill. It's really about trying to maximize the outcomes, positive outcomes for animals that are adoptable, and reducing euthanasia for those adoptable animals. So feel free to chime in and correct me on that, Best Friends, if I have that wrong, but I think we all agree on that as the important part. But I think sometimes people are a little confused on how they should be operating, or worried about how they'll be attacked if they do make a tough decision for euthanasia on what's determined to be an unsafe or unhealthy animal that can't be safely rehomed. So how do we solve this issue? Here's what we cannot control. We don't easily control the economy, and we don't easily control the vet shortage. So I think, there are, hopefully the economy will recover. And I know that there are organizations working heavily on how to get to a place where veterinary access in shelter medicine is increased. So that's, for either for us not to have any focus on at the moment, or some larger organizations are able to do something that will help us with that part of it. But here's what we can control. Some of us, not all of us, can increase access to care. And when we increase access to care, affordable care, I should say, animals can stay out of the shelter system. And I think that's really important. The less animals coming in, I mean, we'll focus on the ones that do have to come in and how to get them out. And all of us can work on increasing adoptions. Every single organization that has an adoption program can have an impact right now. So there is hope. And I think it's really important to note that this is not something that you need to hope goes away on its own. You can play a part, an active part in impacting overall adoption outcomes. And I think one of the things that's important to share is I've been through many generational challenges, whether it was a housing crisis in 2009 or whatever it may be. I can tell you from the old man in the room that no challenging time in animal welfare has been solved by staying the same. We cannot keep doing the same thing and expect to have different results. I think that's the definition of insanity, I believe. And I think it's just important to say, like, this is the time to do something different. And if you take nothing away from this presentation, please go back and think about what you can do different to have a better outcome than you are today. You have some control here, and I think it's important to remind ourselves of that. And so why is it hard to get organization and individuals to make the adoption process easier? That's what we're going to focus the rest of this presentation on. So buckle up, lots of opinions coming your way. So what is open adoption theory and what is it not? What it is it's welcoming adopters into your mission. And I think one of the things that's important for me to remind everybody is that our messaging has always been focused on we need adopters. We are begging for it on social media. Every news article gets placed about this, is asking people to come and adopt. We even have bumper stickers that say adopt, don't shop. We want this to happen. But do we let it happen is the question. How do we handle it after we begged people to come through the doors? How do we treat them? That is what a bottom line comes down for me and has never changed in my mind, is that when we lead with trust and we put trust in our community, we don't have to go through this whole process of judgment and making people feel as though they have to prove themselves to us, which is how people feel through many adoption processes over and over and over again. And I'm going to linger on one thing for just a moment, which is trusting your community. And as someone who takes in animals from relocation, I see this happening throughout our country, and we've made a rule about it. So we do not relocate from an organization that has not explored all opportunities to place animals in their community and are wanting to send the animals out of their community for lack of trust in their community. Like, I get it. Again, will keep saying this. I started in the 90s. Overpopulation was rampant throughout the country. We were all in a terrible place. And I think one of the things that happens when you are dealing with an overwhelming number of animals coming in or having to get up every single day to deal with a large number of homeless animals, it is very easy for us to say, our community is a problem. They don't care. You hear this over and over again. I mentioned that I'm a founding member of an organization called Spark. I believe the website is sparkinsights.org or Insight. Can't remember if there's an S in it. But really what that is about system framing. And it's easy to blame our community or blame the individual that is surrendering the animal and lose faith in our community. But I want to remind everybody that our community is us. We are our community. We are not different from our community. You all started in the shelter because you care about animals. You have volunteers that have joined you and given their time because they care about animals. You have foster homes that care about animals. They are all part of your community. And because you are dealing with a big problem doesn't mean that people don't care. And we should still try to trust our community so that we can maximize our adoption impact. And it is a mindset. It is something that everyone has to recognize, is that there is a community issue, but is it about the individuals or is it about the systems that create the results that none of us like? If we don't have access to access to affordable spay neuter, maybe that we need to look at, is this overpopulation issue because of irresponsible members of our community, or is it because there's not enough access to affordable spay neuter? If you think about systems framing and think beyond the individual, this hero villain sort of standpoint, and start looking at those bigger systems, you can start to understand that you guys are in this together with your community. And it's not that they don't care. It's just that there isn't the right systems to be able to drive the success that we want. Same could be said with, like, I'd rather, like people say all the time, I'd rather live in my car than give up my animal if I had to move. But the reality is there's not enough pet-friendly housing in our communities to be able to allow people to stay with their pets and pets to stay with their people. And so instead of blaming the person who had to move and make sure that their kids had shelter, um, maybe we should start thinking about is this a them issue or is this a systems issue? So soapbox that separately for a moment because I do think when we lose trust in our community, it's hard to remove barriers to adoption and it's hard to think about the community being part of that solution. And when you are in your best place, you are engaging your community and trusting your community. So little derailment there, but hopefully that resonates with people. And if you feel it and you do feel like you don't trust your community, it's a good time to start thinking about what informs that and what you might be able to change for perspective. And I'll give you a hint on it. The thing that changed for me is we started doing vaccine clinics in our community, and I started to recognize very quickly that the communities that I thought were our problem were just like us. They care about their animals. They showed up in mass to get the vaccines that we were offering, and I could see people that loved and cared for their animals the same way that I did, but just didn't have the same access points. And my thought process changed, and our trust in our community was rebuilt once we had that experience. So if you get outside your shelter walls, even for a day, you might see the same thing that I saw years back. All right, so open adoption theory is also focusing on conversation-based matchmaking versus checkbox criteria. I think we made a mistake, if I'm being honest with you. I'm showing this really old picture. It's a photocopy of a printed paper. And I pointed out because our organization was engaged in the first sort of published paper related to the open adoption process back in 1999. And it was during Adoption Forum 1, which doesn't seem to re-engage any longer. There was 3 of them to my knowledge. And it was really, a group of people coming together to talk about what is the best practices for adoption. This one was really about identifying that maybe we're not doing it right. This is back in 1999, but here we are in 2025. If I did my math correctly, that's 26 years ago. And we are still talking about the same thing, and we still can't get past this part. And the mistake that we made wasn't me, it was my bosses, so don't blame me. But the open adoption was probably not the right term. It has a term that's related to human adoption that means a different thing, so it can be a little bit confusing. Open adoption, my understanding in the human world means that you are allowed to contact the biological parents. It's not what we mean here. And what I think it really is better defined as is conversation-based matchmaking. It's really about talking to people, meeting them where they're at, and having a conversation. We are humans. The way that we talk to each other is that we share stories. And when we take away storytelling, it gets weird. And I think if we can bring storytelling and conversation back into the adoption process, and I'm going to talk about that and how you can do that later on, but that's really what it's about. It's about getting to know what people are looking for, telling them what you have for animals that may match their lifestyle, and helping to make that connection. If we focus on that, everything gets better. It's a much easier relationship to have. It's a better process, in my opinion, and it defines better what we're trying to accomplish. And really, it's a different starting point. The checkbox criteria and applications do start the conversation off in a different tone, and it does change things. So again, if you have the ability to shift it to conversation, that's what the whole point is. And it's applicable to all communities everywhere. This isn't designed just for, a shelter, not a rescue group, or, South versus North, or where there's overpopulation and not, municipal or private. This applies everywhere, and we'll talk about that too. Here's what it's not, because this is what it gets boiled down to and thrown back. It is not you have to adopt an animal to anyone who wants an animal. It's not that. It's not just assigned, free to good home, just come in and take it. There's still a process here. No one's saying you have control. You do not lose the control of decision making. If you don't think and you can identify that this person isn't a good match, first and foremost, then you can move on. Or if the person is demonstrating something that makes you feel as though they're going to be not a good caretaker for the animal, you still can say no. So nothing takes that away from you. And I think that's where the like very baseline confusion is the loss of control. And you still have control. It's just about how you approach your adoptions from the start. All right, so the case that people say for keeping barriers in place. I'm going to go through them so that we can just get them out of the way. This is the way we've always done it. I am 100% allergic to this phrase. It is, I think, repeated throughout animal welfare. And if your answer to we do this is because this is the way we've always done it, I get it. What happens in animal welfare is that we start in one place and we adopt the philosophy of the organization we first start working for. And if that philosophy is restrictive adoptions, you will adopt it because you trust your bosses that hired you and you are learning this for the very first time. But at some point, you need to question the system. Um, and you need to question, is this the best way we could do it? And if you are in a healthy work environment, being able to question your processes and evolve your processes should be part of your day-to-day work. And if it's not, maybe reflect as to why that's not happening. If you're the boss and you're saying this is your answer to when people say, could we try something else? Maybe give a little bit of room for innovation. And if your bosses are saying, no way, no how, this is the way we've always done it, see if you can get a conversation going. I'm at the point where I've now started to evolve and change policies that I made. And I'm on like my second or third iteration of changing everything that I started with. And I learned first from a pretty barrier strict adoption process. And I'm very happy that we questioned ourselves and that I allowed, as a boss, I allow those questions to happen. And as an employee, I was allowed to ask those questions. So, a very important thing to do. This is your answer to anything. It's like when your parents say, go to your room, or like, you can't do this. And then your kid asks why, and you say, because. It does not really an answer. So, think a little bit more beyond that part of it. The one bad thing happened scenario is probably the root of most of the criteria that we have, and I get it. When we're trying to do good things, bad things will happen, and there's really no way to erase the possibility of bad things to happen, no matter what your barriers to adoption or how strict you are. I'm telling you right now, I've done these presentations for over 20 years in some form or another, and no one has ever had a system in which they could say no bad things ever happened, even when we were trying to do the right thing. No matter how strict those policies were, it is unfortunately the part of being in animal welfare that happens. And if we overreact to those and we start, a bad thing happened and we now project it out to every person that walks through the door to try to protect against it, you have to really think about how that's impacting them. Concerns about returns. I will say that we are very preoccupied with this subject in animal welfare. Returns are the things that plague us. I also get this. It feels really crappy when you feel like you made a really good match and a good adoption success, and the person didn't do what you wanted them to do, or for whatever reason it didn't work out, or the dog that you thought was wonderful was aggressive. We get really turned around on returns. First of all, we don't even agree with what returns are. Some people think returns are the animal ever comes back to you in its entire lifetime, which is like 12 years of period of time. I really don't think that's return. I think that's you just welcome the animal back into your system. Some people define it as, the first 30 days or 3 months or 6 months. We don't have comparative data easily because we don't all define it the same way. But I think, and for our organization, we needed to start rethinking what returns are because it was really distracting to our staff. Recognize that it's painful and talk through it and give perspective and talk with your staff one-on-one when they struggle, because they will struggle with the return. But don't overreact to it. And we now think of returns as, all right, well, it's no different than an animal going out to foster. We got the animal back. We learned more about the animal. We can now better place this animal into a new home. And that was just the first attempt. We remind ourselves all the time that we think we know lots about animals, but many animals come into us without a history, and we don't know how they're going to react in new environments. So give yourself some grace that there's some unpredictability in adoptions that exists. And people's lives change. So even when the person was the exact match and 3 months later they had a crisis in their family or got divorced or found out they were having a kid, things may change. So don't overreact to it. We now don't even call them returns. We just take them in as owner surrenders. And if we need to figure out what our return rate is, if someone asks us, then we can do a formula on the back end to determine it. But we realized it was just getting in our way, and we started reframing it for our staff, and something I think everyone should give yourself some grace on as well. All right, there's a belief that your community is different, so this won't work where you are for X, Y, and Z. It's not. Your communities aren't different. They're made up of people, and we care for animals. Are there some subtle differences? Probably, but like for the most part, I've not really heard anything that gives me an indication that your community is so wildly different that you can't do this and remove barriers to adoption. We just get in our head. Again, it's related to the trust in our community but we get in our head that our community is different and can't do something. It's been proven in everywhere and every style. It's worked. So if that's your answer, you got to move on from that. This is, an actual issue that takes time and effort. Staff, volunteers, managers, board, supporters won't like it. It's important to recognize that if any change in the way that you do things, some people will come along, some people won't. If you have conviction that it's the right thing for you to do to be able to increase adoptions or to support your community, then you should do it. And you should understand that some people don't like to change, can't change. But that, again, is how we get stuck in this is the way we've always done it. No data to support it safe. There is actually some studies on this. I should have referenced it. I didn't. I apologize. I'll bring it to the panel. There was at least one study done on this that does talk about the connections with animals and related to different adoption policies. But here's the other thing. There's no data to support that any adoption process with any amount of barriers and restrictions has any guarantee of anything, like I mentioned. So I always find this one to be different because it's like I have to prove that treating people with low judgment and respect and without so many checks and balances is safe, but no one is basing their policy and process off of any data either. So let's recognize that you're not doing it for any data-driven reason either. So it really comes down to how you want to handle how you treat people. All right, so the case of removing barriers, I'm gonna go a little quicker because I'm probably lingering too long. But removing barriers leads to lower length of stay and more adoptions, meaning that we can help more animals. And if there was an audience here in front of me that I could see, I would ask you to raise your hand if you don't want to help more animals. And no one's going to raise their hand. We all want to help more animals, but to do that, we actually have to really think through how to do it. Length of stay matters. We can see that our capacity issue from the data is not driven by a massive intake. It is from a lack of outcomes and a lack of, Shelter Animals Count has a really good data point called the population calculator. And what it does is, look at the number of animals coming in compared to the numbers of going out. And I think that's how we should be looking at this. We should be looking at how do we move animals out as quickly as we can into homes that are going to be good matches for them so that we can now bring in more animals and support those animals and get them into adoptive homes as well. If your process is really slow, animals are staying in your system for a long time, and it's not because they have a behavior challenge or medical challenge, then it may be your process. And if you can speed that up a little bit, it's worth it. And if we want to reduce euthanasia, all orgs need to commit to removing adoption barriers. That's not just municipal shelters, but it's also private shelters and rescues. I think what we see with, I'll use rescue as an example. If you are seeing an incredibly long length of stay in rescue and you're not able to get those animals effectively, quickly into homes, then you can't pull animals from shelters and help more animals. And that means you also can't then, in my opinion, go back and criticize that shelter for euthanizing for space. We all play a role together. We all are part of one system. And the decisions that we make at our individual locations with our individual style impact the whole. So if you think that you are separate and you're saying to one shelter, well, your live release rate is below 90%, you're not no-kill, you're a kill shelter, and you're using all these labels, let's not forget that you should be looking in the mirror first and thinking about, what am I doing to impact that? And if you're not focusing on increasing your adoptions and your length of stay, and you're saying those mean things to people, cut it out. I think you really got to look first at what you can do, and then what each of our challenges are and what our requirements are. Start thinking about how we all work together. Because I will tell you that my minor sort of tangent soapbox here is that I hope that by the time I retire, we see one major thing change in animal welfare that has not yet changed. It is that we separate quickly over small differences instead of struggling to stay together over the things that we have in common. And once we start to realize that we are all part of one movement and we all are responsible to each other, we will move mountains. We will solve this last little bit of homelessness that can be solved, and euthanasia will go down as a result. And I don't mean to pick on best friends too much here, but we partner with best friends. I don't believe in using the terminology no kill, but I understand why best friends does, and it doesn't mean that we might have a difference on how we approach terminology or what we focus on when it comes to those things, but it's also not going to get in the way of figuring out how we can work together and how we can, like I could just scream and fight about why do you use no kill? We shouldn't use no kill because create labels. We could have that back and forth, but what does that do? It just burns our energy out. What I can tell you is that Best Friends cares deeply about helping animals get out alive. I care about animals getting out alive. We have something very much in common. Let's focus on how we work together, not just focus on what we have different. So again, small soapbox tangent, picking on Best Friends on their own webinar. That might get me in trouble. And less conflict with potential adopters. I will tell you that every time I fill out like a credit card application or need a loan at the bank, like even though I already have done the calculations that I can afford this or whatever, or I can get approved, approval processes make you feel judged. They feel weird. And when you are starting a relationship with people on a yes or no, you are creating a dynamic that will lead to more conflict if your answer is no. And so conversation-based matchmaking, if you're focused on the match and whether it's the right match, it's easier to say no. It's they say, hey, I don't think this is the right match for you for this, and this reason. This dog is high energy. You wanted a low-key dog. I don't think it's the right match right now. Or without the application, you can even say, I'm sorry, but you make us uncomfortable. We're not going to adopt you for this, and this reason. And I could say that to you face to face. And yes, they can get mad, but you're going to have less of that overall. What I would encourage you to think about is what happens when people go through your shelter and they see animals in care and they fill out an application. What they are doing is they are saying mentally in their mind, I'm taking this animal home. And you have put yourself in a position to say, yes, you are, or no, you're not. And no, you're not results in a lot of conflict. And I think you could all deal with less conflict right now. Slower stress for staff. Again, animals are moving out the door. Doesn't feel weird. Less financial resources being applied to animal care. That can be used to keep pets in their homes. The longer we keep animals in care, the more it costs us. And the longer they stay in care, we're also not collecting an adoption fee if you collect an adoption fee. So this is impacting your overall budget. We can rely less on transfers of animals to manage capacity. As I noted, we're seeing a decrease in transfer. We got to change our strategy. If you were relying on transfer and you were just calling and cold calling and cold calling, looking for more transfers, and you're spending more energy out there to do it, I can tell you that everybody's at capacity all around the country right now. For dogs, it's going to be harder to find more transport options right now, but you can focus on adoptions, and that is what you can control, like we mentioned before. And some of the most successful orgs have demonstrated low barrier adoptions are effective and safe. So look to other people, see what they've done, talk to other shelters about how they've approached things and learn from them. I can be one of those. I'm happy to talk to you about it. But if you can see successful orgs having success with this, maybe that'll give you some confidence and trust. And I thought about putting this one in there as a Gen Xer myself. And like, I'm not sure that everybody wants to hear from a middle-aged white man about how younger generations operate, but here I am to tell you that millennials and Gen Z generations are adopters right now, and they don't jive with long processes, and they don't jive with judgment. They do care about equity, they do care about animals, and if your process doesn't equal that, they're going somewhere else. And you got to remember that. And the way that we've always done it does not matter to this generation of adopters. All right, what about fee-waived adoptions? It's a commonly debated topic. It's just the removal of an adoption fee, not the removal of a process. A great way to deliver a call to action to your community, because what rings true is not so much that the animals are free, but that you need help with adoptions. It is a call to action for your community. That's what they hear. They don't hear the free is motivating, because free is motivating for everybody. And we call it fee-waived adoptions because we're fancy, but it really just means free. It is a call to action. That's what people deliver on. That's how your community responds. An event helps you with that. Everyday practice, I recognize that people will do this every day, and that can work. But if you normally have an adoption fee, I would suggest you try it as an event versus an everyday practice to make it special and to get that call of action and get the attention through social media and news. It can also energize staff and volunteers. If you time these at the times in which you have the highest capacity and are the most stretched, you get a little bit of relief. And isn't that great for everybody in the middle of a summer when everybody's been, going full tilt for months, to just get a little bit of a break and see all the animals leave for a day? It's amazing. You'll fill up pretty quickly afterwards, but it will help. And I'm also Gen Xer, so I might not have gotten this link correctly in the thing. I don't think you can copy it easily. But also have a FAQ about all the things we talked about with fee waived, so that when people do challenge you on fee waived, which they do to us all the time on social media, we just point to the FAQ. We've already answered all these questions. We thought through all these things. Trust us. We're doing this for a reason. And you can point to that FAQ that's built out on your website. So are there concerns about fee waived adoption events? Well, this is my presentation, so my opinion is no. People, again, respond to our message. Adoptions increased before the event. So like that's the special sauce for me. We look at the weekend before our adoption event, and there's people who are like, I'm going to get a dog. You know what? And I'm not going to miss out on the best dog. So I'm not going to take my chance that that dog will be gone by the time the event starts. They'll start to scout. That's another way that people approach it is like, all right, this event's coming up. I want to have a chance at the best dog. I'm going to go check them out on the weekend before. And they'll be like, can I get the adoption fee waived now? And you can say, you can either pay the adoption fee today or take your chance and come back during the event. And guess what? Most people will just pay the adoption fee, adopt the animal, and you'll have a nice spike before you even go into the event if it works the way that it's worked for us. And again, the process stays the same, just the fee changes. We do some surveys here and there just to get a sense of why people decided to adopt a dog during the fee waived adoption event. This is just 27 responses, but we do these regularly. And you can see here that the reason that people came in was they cared about providing a home for a homeless animal. It comes through loud and clear. The other ones are promotion attracted you to the visit, and the financial savings. We know it all costs a lot. Food for feeding your pet costs more now. Veterinary care is outrageous. That matters. Sometimes if you can remove one barrier like the fee, someone who's been on the fence about adopting will adopt. But man, they come because you need them. And that's why you can trust your community. All right, I'm going to breeze through these because I did linger too long. And I do want to give Erica the few minutes that she asked for at the end. So here's what we did. When this capacity issue hit our doors was in 2023. And instead of like just hoping it was going to get better, we went into action. So we really just dialed up a 2012 strategy for cats and we applied it to dogs. We still, we prioritize maintaining local surrender options to make sure that Massachusetts animals had a way to get into our shelter systems, but we also wanted to make sure a transfer from other local shelters and animal control facilities was an option, and we still wanted to continue to take relocation of animals uninterrupted. We saw the transfer numbers going down. We saw transfers locally going down. We saw local surrenders being harder to get. What we didn't want to do is cut one of those two things or three things to be able to deal with our capacity. So instead, we focused on reducing barriers to adoption, creating equity in adoption costs, which means in addition to fee-waived adoption events, which we increased, we also gave authority to our staff to waive an adoption fee for anyone that felt like they needed a reduction in the adoption fee or to have a fee waived to be able to move forward with the adoption. And we gave them all that power. All they had to do was just check in with a supervisor, and then we waived it. And we also fundraised with donors to fund on the back end, so we didn't actually lose on our operating budget. But we also recognize that our staff got some bad habits. As a card-carrying member of the Open Adoptions Club from 1999, we realized, something happened during COVID that changed things, and our processes got all weird, and lots of people left. A lot of people came in, and they weren't used to doing face-to-face adoptions, and our process had changed. We had to go back and make sure that our staff was living the mission that we identified with reducing barriers. And to do that, this QR code you hopefully can scan will bring you to a document we created for our staff, which is a guidance document on the common barriers to adoption. So it covers everything, I think. What happens when an old person wants to adopt a kitten? It gives guidance on that so that people can, we would have a consistent message from everybody. And we would tell them, when you're not sure and uncomfortable, here's who you should talk to determine whether you should go forward with the adoption or not. So you're not alone on it, and that we are maintaining that consistency. So check that QR code out. I think you can steal it. You can rebrand it to your organization. I don't care. It's really about reducing the barriers to adoption, and we want it to be really prescriptive about what that means to us on a day-to-day basis and in common scenarios. So we had good results. At a time when everybody was identifying and still is identifying that that capacity is an issue, we were able to identify that we we're increasing adoptions, not reducing adoptions. It did result also in an increase in intake. So you can see the values here, but adoptions went up 16% from 2022 to 2023 when our capacity was struggling, and it went up again 8% in 2024. We expect it to go up again in 2025. And our fee-waived adoption events in 2022, we weren't doing them, but we saw that we have an ever-increasing number of dogs going home, and that increase is partly from our organization, but we also created a coalition with the thanks of help of Best Friends to help other organizations achieve the same results. They can join our fee-waived adoption events. It's open to any shelters and the coalition members that we have. We help reduce some of the barriers to adoption and help increase adoption success because, again, success isn't about our organization having success. It's about all organizations having success. And we had an opportunity to help with that. Again, thanks to Best Friends. I picked on him at least twice, so I need to at least give him 2 compliments. And so how you can get started. If you haven't read the Adopters Welcome Manual, which just got updated, please do so. Hopefully that link is to the new one. Ask your staff who qualifies for adoption on your team. That's a sobering moment in just a second that you can do. And it's been done at many conferences to be like, could you adopt from us? And if not, maybe that's a problem. You can also ask, if you have a landlord policy and you're trying to figure out how to do a landlord policy, ask how many of your staff violated a landlord policy in the past. I bet you most of your staff will raise their hand. And man, if we're not doing it, why are we asking everybody else that's coming to adopt to do it? Maybe that's not the most important thing to make a adoptive home be an adoptive home. Here's the one that I really suggest. And this one is the litmus test for whether your questions are judgy. Is you've memorized them. You've been through your adoption application a million times. You've talked to people 1,000 times through the same thing. If you can't recite them in your sleep, I'd be surprised. So say them out loud. Ask them to a person's face. And first of all, you'll find that they answer them differently. I always use the example of what's the name of your vet and are your animals up to date or whatever the questions are. If I just write that, if I ask people to write that, I get it written and then I have to call the vet who's not supposed to tell me things about their clients, but will, and I get an answer one way or the other. But if I ask someone, what vet do you use? They will give me a lot more. They'll be like, oh, I use Dr. Marcus at Methuen Vet. I like that doctor best because they are nice and they're patient with my animal and my animal is more comfortable with them. And they really helped me through a hard time. And they give you a lot more storytelling that was way better than a veterinary reference ever will be. And if they're like, I don't know, I think it's maybe in Methuen, Massachusetts, but maybe it's in Lawrence, Massachusetts. I don't know. Maybe you ask for a vet reference then, but maybe you don't do it for everybody. But if you ask your questions to the main point, if you ask your questions verbally to somebody in person, face to face, and you can't say them word for word, you should change them. Because if it makes you uncomfortable to ask them that way, it's an uncomfortable question. And you start thinking about even just changing your questions if you do nothing else, or just remove the piece of paper, ask the same questions, and then see where it goes. If having a conversation with someone feels better, ditch your applications. It feels better to the person, I can guarantee you that. And like I said earlier, seek opportunities out of the shelter to interact with your community. I think that is a moment in which all of our perceptions and judgment can be changed when we recognize that we all love animals. Animals are important to us, and that maybe we don't need to be gatekeepers for adoption. Perhaps maybe we can recognize that we share the same values in making sure that homeless animals have homes. And when you watch your community act, they often do this on their own. They take in a stray cat. They take in a cat from somebody who went into the hospital. The community stands up for each other, and we're part of the community. These animals come from our community. We should start trusting our community. So your challenge is change one thing in your adoption process, literally just one thing. Go back and just change one thing tomorrow. And if you change one thing and it worked, then change another thing. And just start thinking about how you can approach this differently. Because again, you're not going to get any different results if you do the same exact thing. But if it's a big, huge change, just take it in little pieces and think about little things you can do each day to make that adoption process better. And I'll tell you one of the things, my favorite, and I'll end with this, as I think I'm at time, which is I have made lasting connections with adopters still to this day, and I haven't done an adoption since 2017 for the most part. And the staff in the shelter that I started in Methuen, they come to me all the time and they're like, "Oh my God, when is it going to be that somebody comes in and doesn't ask for you again? You haven't worked here directly for 6 years." Did I do that math right? No, longer, 8 years. And I think what that matters is that because I treated people with respect and that I made connections with people through a conversation-based matchmaking process, it wasn't a transaction, it was a relationship that we created. And when you can create a relationship, guess what? They come to you when they are struggling. They come to you when they have a question. They don't go to someone else and get bad information. They treat you as if somebody that is important to them. And isn't that what we kind of want out of our adoption process, is to build that long-standing relationship and be part of that for the animal's life if we can? That's what I wanted. That's what we achieve with conversation-based matchmaking. And that's what I want for all of you, because it feels a hell of a lot better. So I will leave it on that. You guys, no questions today, but I will be joining the panel on the 17th to help with questions then. And thank you for listening to all my opinions.
Thank you, Mike. We really appreciate you coming out and sharing all your expertise and getting on that soapbox with us. Always love hearing it. So we do appreciate your time being here. And just before everyone goes, I have a couple notes. We will have our next session next week, so tune in for that. But in the meantime, you'll receive an email with a link to a Trello board full of resources. Those resources will include a lot of what Mike mentioned today. So if you missed any of those links or the QR code, we will have that available for you. And the recording of the session will also be linked in that email and uploaded to our network partner YouTube channel. And there will also be information about our dog life-saving fundamentals course. So similar, like our last series had a cat life-saving fundamentals course that you could apply for. We have one for dogs. So you'll get more information about that in our email. And then again, we'll be here this time next week for the second part of our series. This will be all about making your shelter the best place to acquire a pet. And we look forward to seeing you there. And of course, we appreciate everything that you do for the animals in your community and the people. And if you're not a Best Friends Network partner, please sign up. It's free and you'll get lots of opportunities and grant opportunities as well. Otherwise, we thank you all for being here today, and we will see you next week. Thank you again, Mike. We appreciate you being here.